a quick introduction to how classification of roads is related to their design. So hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll understand a bit about the relationship between road function and road design. Now, often when road hierarchies are introduced, they're paired with descriptions of their design and use. So here's an example from Auckland Transport, and there's other examples in the textbook chapter. So you have, motorways with high traffic volumes, many lanes, high speeds, etc., right down to local and collector roads with very low volumes, very few lanes, high access function, etc. But because of this, there's sometimes an assumption that the type of road is an outcome of traffic volume and design. So if you have a road with a given volume, design characteristics, a certain type of service to abutting land, so amount of access, that will tell you what kind of road it is. And certainly you need to understand the design characteristic of road types. So if you're working as a traffic engineer and you're redeveloping or you're designing a local street or an arterial road, you need to know what those standards and guidelines are for your jurisdiction. In Australia, it's the Austroads guidelines. You may have different standards and designs in your country if you don't live in Australia. But with all that in mind, it's important to understand that roads should be classified based on their intended function, not just reacting to their existing design or use. So I'm going to use the example of rat running. Okay, so rat running is the idea of through traffic bypassing congested roads by using local roads instead of the arterial network. Now, if you were to do this reactively, using an example not far from where I live, here's an incredibly congested corridor in Melbourne. This is Hoddle Street, north-south arterial. This is where the Eastern Freeway ends and dumps lots and lots of traffic onto the arterial network. So this whole area, all of the arterials are very congested. Because of this, quite often, people end up rat running down this tiny local street through the back areas of back neighborhoods to bypass that congested area. Now, if you were to classify this road reactively, you might say, oh, well, the volumes on that road are getting pretty high. We should reclassify it as say a collector road and redesign it to take the extra traffic. But that's not necessarily the best outcome for the neighborhood, the local residents, or for the entire network. It doesn't necessarily fix the problem, it just moves it somewhere else. So in this case, the choice was made to maintain the current classification, the intended function of that road as a local road. And in this case, they actually changed the design to try to better impose that classification. So this is a different perspective. This is from the Melways map, but each of these little red bumps, red areas, is a speed hump to quite vigorously try to reinforce the intended function of the road as a local road. All that being said, it is also important to understand the actual use of a road when you're making that decision of whether to impose the intended function on the road or to perhaps change the functional classification of the road. Sometimes a road is so dysfunctional that the classification of it actually does need to be changed and the design changed to meet the new classification. So I'm not trying to pick on Shanghai here, but here are some examples that I noticed on a recent trip of where perhaps the intended function of the road is not matching its current use. So on the left we have a road on a university campus that is meant to be the vehicle access road, but the sidewalk is currently being used unofficially by bicycle parking, which means that the pedestrians have nowhere to walk except on the road. So here the decision needs to be made. Does the intended function of the road need to be imposed through redesign, perhaps providing bicycle parking elsewhere? Or should that road be reclassified as a more pedestrian priority road? On the right, a similar story. This is a shopping strip in Shanghai where the amount of space given over to pedestrians is insufficient, and instead the pedestrians are spilling out very much into the traffic. So again, the road needs to be reassessed. Does its intended function as a traffic mover need to be better imposed, in which case you need to figure out where all the pedestrians are going to go? Or should the road be reclassified as more of an access amenity economic road, and perhaps reduce the amount of road space. So these are the kind of decisions that are made every day in traffic engineering, how to balance the relationship between the intended function of a road and its actual use, whether a road needs to be reclassified or redesigned. And this presentation was just meant as a very brief introduction to that relationship.